The radar screen flickers for just a moment. It's subtle, almost unnoticeable. No alarms, no warnings. And yet, somewhere deep inside a US command center, a silence settles in, the kind that only comes when something impossible might be happening. Thousands of miles away, in the deserts and coastlines under Houthi control, men stare at the sky, convinced they have challenged something untouchable. They believe they've drawn a line. What they don't realize is this: the line they crossed isn't visible on any map. Because the aircraft now moving toward them was never meant to be seen in the first place. For months, tensions had been building quietly. Missiles fired into shipping lanes. Drones launched toward distant silhouettes on the horizon. Radio chatter filled with threats and declarations of defiance. The Houthis had already tested the limits of global patience, and survived. That survival bred confidence. Confidence turned into provocation. And provocation, eventually, turned into a challenge aimed directly at the most elusive weapon in America's arsenal. The so-called ghost bomber. To the outside world, it sounded like bravado. Another militant group making exaggerated claims. Another viral headline. But inside military planning rooms, the tone was different. Because even suggesting a challenge to a platform like this meant one thing: escalation had entered a new phase. The Houthis had spent years adapting. What began as a regional insurgency had slowly transformed into something more complex. They learned to operate drones. They learned missile targeting. They learned psychological warfare, the art of appearing stronger than they truly were. And above all, they learned how modern conflicts are fought not just with weapons, but with perception. Their media channels framed the narrative carefully. America, they said, was vulnerable. American technology, they claimed, could be detected. American power, they implied, could be challenged. And when they spoke of the ghost bomber, they did so with confidence, as if they understood it. As if they could see it. But the B-2 spirit was never built to be understood by those on the ground. Long before this moment, long before the Houthis ever entered global headlines, American engineers were solving a different problem. How do you strike anywhere on Earth without being detected? How do you deliver overwhelming force without warning? The answer wasn't speed. It wasn't altitude. It was invisibility. The ghost bomber doesn't rely on brute strength. It relies on absence. Absence of radar return. Absence of sound until it's too late. Absence of any sign that an attack is even coming. Entire air defense systems can be operational, alert, scanning, and still see nothing. That is the paradox the Houthis underestimated. Their confidence was rooted in past encounters. They had fired missiles toward US naval vessels and lived to tell the story. They had launched drones and forced responses. Each survival reinforced a dangerous belief that America's reactions followed predictable patterns. That escalation had limits. They believed that if they pushed just far enough, they could expose weakness. What they didn't understand was that some responses don't announce themselves. In Washington, the calculus was cold and deliberate. There was no rush, no public threats, no dramatic press conferences. When a decision finally formed, it wasn't about punishment. It was about correction. A demonstration, not of anger, but of capability. The ghost bomber doesn't scramble from nearby bases. It doesn't need regional permission. It can take off from the continental United States, refuel in midair, cross oceans, and arrive over a target that has no idea it's already too late. As the aircraft moved, there was no sonic boom, no radio chatter picked up by hostile ears. Radar operators saw only empty sky. And yet, precision-guided weapons were already locked in. The Houthis' air defenses were active. Missile crews stood ready. Radar systems rotated endlessly. They were watching the sky for threats they could recognize: jets, drones, cruise missiles. What they weren't prepared for was something that didn't appear at all. The first indication that something was wrong didn't come from radar. It came from impact. Key facilities went dark almost simultaneously. Communications failed. Command centers lost contact. Storage sites that had been carefully hidden were suddenly gone. There was no warning siren. No chance to relocate. No opportunity to respond. To observers, it looked like chaos. To planners, it was precision. This is what modern air dominance looks like when executed correctly. No dogfights. No dramatic engagements. Just silence, followed by irreversible change. The Houthis' claim of challenge collapsed in real time. Their media channels went quiet. Statements that had been prepared were never released. Because the narrative they intended to build no longer matched reality. The ghost bomber had not been challenged. It had simply passed through. In the aftermath, analysts began dissecting what had happened. Not just the strikes, but the message. The choice of platform mattered. This wasn't a conventional response. It wasn't a regional aircraft operating from nearby allies. It was a strategic asset, used deliberately. The message was simple, but brutal: there are levels to this conflict you cannot reach. The B-2 spirit exists above escalation ladders. Its presence doesn't signal war, it signals inevitability. Once deployed, the outcome is already decided. There is no defense to activate. No retaliation to prepare. Only consequences to absorb. For the Houthis, this moment marked a turning point. Their strategy had relied on controlled provocation, hitting just hard enough to stay relevant, but not hard enough to invite overwhelming force. By invoking the ghost bomber, even rhetorically, they crossed an invisible threshold. In asymmetric warfare, symbolism matters. And they had chosen the wrong symbol to test. The reality is harsh but clear. Militias can disrupt shipping lanes. They can harass naval forces. They can shape headlines. But they cannot contest strategic air dominance. Not when it comes from an aircraft designed decades ahead of anything they possess. The ghost bomber doesn't chase enemies. It waits until they expose themselves. In the days that followed, global shipping quietly resumed. Naval task forces adjusted posture. Diplomatic channels activated behind closed doors. Official statements remained carefully worded, intentionally vague. Because the most effective deterrence is the kind that doesn't need explanation. For viewers watching this unfold from afar, it may look like just another episode in a long conflict. Another strike. Another claim. Another counterclaim. But for those who understand what was used, and why, the implications are far deeper. This wasn't about Yemen alone. It wasn't about the Houthis alone. It was a reminder broadcast without words to every actor watching closely. You can shout. You can threaten. You can challenge. But some weapons don't respond to noise. They respond with silence. And by the time you realize they were there, the mistake has already been made.